Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Profiles in Risk. I am your host, Nick Lamparelli. On this, I guess we would call this a dreary fall morning in New England, although I think you're in New York.
Yes.
I am pleased to introduce Carey Anne Nadeau. Carey is the co-founder and CEO of Open Data Nation. Open Data Nation transforms open data into reliable predictions that mitigate risks to public health and safety. Carey, how are you?
Good morning. Yeah, this day leaves a lot of opportunity for improvement. It's a little gray outside, but we're starting
Yeah,
off in the right spot.
yeah, it's getting chilly too. So we had I don't know if you had that windstorm that came through after the rains, but we had like all of a sudden it stopped raining and the wind was blowing and it we had all of these pretty leaves on the trees and it knocked all the leaves off.
Oh, that's a bummer. I live in Harlem, so an occasional tree is a blessing. I didn't notice, but yeah, no, I love the fall season, this sort of transition into winter and this sort of getting into your cozy warm sweaters.
Yeah.
This is my time of year.
Yeah, yeah. My wife as well. I just someone's got to shovel the snow. So unfortunately, that's my job, and I know that's like right around the corner. When it gets into the 30s at nighttime, you're like, oh
It's coming.
man,
Winter is
so
coming.
so close. Like just
Mhm.
one bad night, and we could have six inches to a foot outside. So
Well, I just bought my first car, which I guess I'm technically a millennial. So that puts me in the buying your first car in your 30s category. And I realized the other day, I've lived in DC for most of my life, that I didn't have one of those ice picks for the
yeah,
windshield when it snows or when it rains. So I have to go over to Target or some other store later this afternoon and make sure I'm fully prepared for a New York winter. This will be my
and
only my second.
gloves too. Don't forget the gloves. Nice strong gloves.
Gloves, hat. Last year I made the mistake of a coat, a winter coat that I thought was sufficient. It was
Yeah,
drastically underestimated. I guess last winter was pretty bad too,
yeah,
though.
yeah. Uh, I'm excited to have you on. I'm going to kick it right off and get going and
Sure.
talk about Open Data Nation. Tony made the introduction of you and myself, and I checked out your website, and I'm like, it's perfect for the show. And then I really dug in. I was like, ooh, this is really cool stuff. So I was really excited to have this conversation with you. So first question I always kick over to my guest is give you a couple minutes for an elevator pitch. What is Open Data Nation?
Yeah, Open Data Nation, or we've been calling it ODN for short as of recent. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But ODN, we take city administrative data. So this is things like police crash reports, permit requests, inspection results, and we pull them together to create a risk index that measures your exposure to risk. Maybe things that are outside of your control or your personal knowledge, but that might expose you to things like being involved in a traffic crash. So if you think about, when you drive in downtown New York City, for example, and congestion and potholed roads that are
Mm-hmm.
maybe raining or snowing, all of those factors, sort of the insurance industry has largely been unable to tap into until ODN came on the scene and provided this sort of risk index that complements what we know about personal behaviors with the question of sort of where you are and how that matters for your risk profiling.
Yeah. So, how did it start? So, there's a lot of that information. I was like surprised at how detailed some of it is. It was almost like, why are they collecting this information? Like things like bikes,
Uh-huh.
places to store bikes, or the amount of number of bikes that get stolen at certain spots. Uh,
Mhm.
let's rewind a little bit. Why ODN?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. There's a bunch of city administrative data every year. In the United States alone, we estimate it's about 2.5 billion records of data produced. We work with the city of Chicago, for example, which produces 7 million records of data every single day. So it's a really massive, untapped big data resource that sort of flies under the radar. We have a data dictionary on our website, odnsure.com, that's S-U-R-E, sure, where we list out 60 some odd data sets with samples and links so that you can check it out and just become familiarized with all of this data that cities publish. They publish it honestly for the functions of doing business. It's their business that they're collecting this information for. So for bikes, they're looking to plan, bike lanes and safe transportation, alternative transportation options for their residents. They collect things like rat sightings, which is one of the most popular data sets across the United States. Where are the rats? They collect things like that for health and safety questions, right? Where might we be concerned that garbage isn't getting picked up or that children may be exposed to unsafe conditions? So things like you wouldn't expect the government to be keeping tabs on, they are. There are a lot of spatial information about where things are happening. And how that sort of inspired ODN. I think, ODN doesn't come from an insurance background to
Hmm.
start. And I think that that's kind of a cool asset in a number of companies that are popping up in the insurtech space that come from a really different sector, have been successful in a different sector and figuring out some problem, and are really adapting and evolving their solutions to match the needs of the insurance industry. So you get these really diverse, somewhat, you look at a problem sideways kind of
Sure.
uh, people who are bringing really unique perspectives. So why ODN, why insurance? Well, we realized that we were building these models, these risk models essentially. And there's a lot of folks who have a vested interest in risk modeling, not just insurance carriers, right? The cities themselves want to know
Yep.
where problems are going to happen so they can get ahead of them. Banks are looking at this information to do lending, investment in real estate. You could think about all of the city administrative data related to taxes and property inspections that might be really interesting to someone who's doing real estate investment. Well, we realized, heck, we're building these predictive models that help people tap into this data in a way that they were unable to before. Let's start with insurance because we think insurance is a space where you can motivate really positive behaviors, right? You can provide information for loss prevention. You can, through monetary sticks, say your policy is going to be a little bit more expensive, and
Yeah.
actually, see real, effective, immediate change happen in terms of public health and safety. So we started there, but our perspective is really deeply embedded in understanding and having knowledge of the data that cities publish and why they publish it and how insurance might be able to use it.
Okay. So we're going to go into, I think, a lot of depth on
Sure.
that. I
Let's
want
go.
to I want to start on day one minus 365. Like
Okay.
when did the light bulb go off on your head? When were you like,
Yeah.
I can do something with this? Like there's something valuable here, and if I don't start a company to take advantage of it, no one's going to. Like, give me that story.
Yeah. And I feel like I've been the Paul Revere for a while now, like running through the town being like, the British are coming, the data is coming, everyone. Like, it's already here. We've been doing this for 5 years now, full time with ODN. But when you asked, when it really started minus 365, I thought to joke, my parents met in a small town. They got together and, about 9 months later, it all began because this has been a lifelong journey and culminating in ODN for now. But the idea really came from when I was a kid. I would go to town halls with my mom. My mom was very politically active, which I think is really important, and was really, instructive in my life and fundamental to who I am now. She would take me to these town halls, these school board meetings, and I would get up and I would stand in front of the little podium or the little microphone and say, I'm Carey Anne Nadeau. I'm 8 years old. I go to elementary school here, and here's what I think about the problem. And 90% of the time, people either laughed or said, oh, that's cute, or, that's a show, whatever it may be. But I felt like my political activism, my voice wasn't being heard in the same way that maybe other voices around the table were. And that manifests in many ways for many people, right? People of color, people who are minorities, people who are poor, people who can't make it to town hall meetings for a variety of reasons. They have families or transportation issues or whatever it may be. And I always thought, man, if we're only making decisions off of the people who are around the table and the data that we have currently and the information we have access to, we're missing the opportunity to pair that with not only qualitative information, but quantitative information that may reinforce, that may bolster, that may question some of our assumptions. And so I would watch Sunday morning television and say, like, why are they yelling at each other when there's data we could bring to bear on this question? And then the data start, like it began very early for me, but it manifested, it became real when in 2009, the Obama administration passed what's called the Open Data Act. It was a federal piece of legislation that encouraged the federal government or agencies of the federal government to publish data online. Data.gov was a consequence of that if you've ever used it. And it really, quadrupled overnight, and now it sort of exponentially grew the amount of data that the federal government produced. And while the federal government has since, for a variety of reasons including political ones, kind of drawn back their efforts at publishing data, cities took up that charge, and cities started really publishing vast amounts of very hyper specific, I'm talking like XY coordinate where things are happening, updated daily data that folks could tap into. And so it was really that proliferation of data that enabled that, fire in my belly and the sort of yelling to the crowds and hoping that they listened. It enabled me to actually bring data to bear to some questions. And that's when I really went gangbusters. My background set me up for that moment. It was a very convenient moment in that my life and my passions aligned with, both a political act as well as a broader movement to use data and data science to answer questions. But I had for years been studying statistics. My background's in statistics in cities. So I worked for the Brookings Institution. I worked for the Urban Institute. I have a master's in city planning from MIT. So like I said, I feel like I'm the Paul Revere running through the town saying like,
Yeah.
I know they're coming, come join or come understand, at least for now, what it is and how you can take advantage of it too.
Yeah. I'm going to say something maybe controversial.
Sure.
I don't
That's
think there are a lot of facts in the real world. People are always like, oh, we gotta present the facts.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of data, and then there's a lot of work to say, what does this data mean?
Yeah.
Rarely are there like facts the way we think of it. Even like in science, I always feel like we revert to, hey, we can bring the scientific facts to the table, when in fact there's so much uncertainty. It's just like, well, this is our best guess. So the data is coming. It's actually here and it's growing. So we got the big data revolution. But this conversation is reminding me so much of my interview with David Tobias of Better View, who does drones. And he said, he was looking to take drones and apply it towards insurance. So he remembers the first project. He gets the drones, they fly up, take a bunch of pictures, sends it to the underwriter, and the underwriter is like, what am I supposed to do with this? And he was ecstatic, but the light bulb went off in his head, and it's like, I have to provide insights. Like we have to do more work here. That's the data. Now we have to get to insight. I prefer insight to facts. I just think it works better. So ODN.
How do we get to insights?
You got all of this data, right? You need problems that you want to link it to, and then there's modeling, and then there's we're going to advance. I'm going to foreshadow machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually do something with it. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there, but I do agree on many fronts, right? The idea that there's only one answer is a falsehood. So there is no fact that everyone can agree on, because even the same picture, for example, from a drone can be interpreted differently. The same bar chart, someone can see one story and another person can see another story. So it's really about defining and crafting the narrative, as you mentioned, for how is this useful to me? How am I going to interpret this to benefit the work I need to do, whether that's making my life more efficient or my decisions more effective? So what we learned very early on was this data has been available. Like you mentioned, the revolution is long past. We call it now an evolution because it's no longer revolutionary to think about data and big data and using big data or exploring machine learning. But we're on this evolution that says, look, it's out there. It's been out there since 2009. If you ask carriers, they know about city data. The problem is for them, it was very disaggregated and very disorganized. So if you wanted to build city data into a pricing model, for example, and you sold into 150 cities, you'd need to build 150 separate pricing models just to leverage one type of data set. And then that's not even thinking about, okay, maybe I'm ingesting, I don't know, tax evaluation data into my pricing model. That's not even then considering also the magnitude of, all right, I also want to add permits, and I also want to add crime at a local level, and I also want to add weather data, and I also want to add, complaints or requests for inspections. So because the data was just so diverse and so disaggregated from place to place, while it was sort of right underneath our nose, no one could really leverage it.
Yep.
And that's where I think ODN steps in. What we decided to do was build first and foremost an index that consolidated a lot of those measures that we know are predictive of risks and losses that folks care about. And we consolidated it into an index. We learned very quickly. We have some great mentors in some of the carriers. One sat me down and said, you know what? No one's ever going to buy your index because we've all been burned by FICO. We all don't want the same score. We all don't want to buy the same score. Enough with creating scores. Don't sell me a score if you're going to turn around and sell it to my competitor. I was like, okay, that's fair. How am I going to deal with that? So what we do is actually in a 6-week pilot, actually adjust our scores. We can customize them to bind, no bind decisions or quote, no quote decisions. And that enables, the score to be specific, unique, custom to each carrier. That I think that experience at 6 weeks is a real learning process for us because some of the variables that we know are predictive of risk or some of the industry classes that we cover in our model may not be of interest to the carrier, or they may already have a proxy for that data in some other metric. And so when we sit with carriers who say, all right, do you insure small businesses? Do you insure restaurants? If you don't like restaurants, we're going to take them out of the model so it doesn't deflect from what you like to write. And that sort of customization and that sort of care with our customers, I think makes a big difference to your point about not coming in and pretending I've got the score that's going to revolutionize insurance pricing or revolutionize insurance risk selection overnight. I'm not that naive and I'm not that bombastic, to be frank. It's that sort of, you have to work with the client to help them both interpret what you have and also customize it to what they need at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's a weakness for a lot of insurtechs that come in that don't understand insurance. I get bombarded with scores as well, models, and one thing that I see, it's always like, we can help you avoid, high crime area, high risk areas, and we can find the low risk stuff. And that's for insurtech companies coming in, that's a very incomplete message because you have to low risk is what everybody wants. So the way I describe it is the low risk stuff is the low margin stuff because everyone's going after it. It's going to be highly competitive to go after. The high risk stuff isn't necessarily the profitable stuff. And then there's the window in between, and that's going to vary. But company by company, region by region, peril by peril, model by model, that's going to vary. And it's optimizing that as the sweet spot, figuring out, is there anything of scale in this pocket where I can be different than my competitors and get margin on the stuff that I'm selling?
Yeah, I will.
You really nailed it with that.
I will slightly disagree with that comment though, because I think scores, just let's call them all scores, let's throw us into that bucket for the hot second, can be used for a number of different questions in the insurance sales cycle. And the one you're talking about is really interesting to me. It's sort of risk selection and pricing. Which ones do we want to provide a quote to, and how do we price them so that we know we're covering our losses and making a reasonable profit? But I do think there are other questions in the insurance cycle that a score can be really instructive for.
Okay,
So
let's go.
one, yeah, one we focus on, you mentioned sort of the lowest tranche and the highest tranche. Well, what we realized when we sat down with insurance carriers, we spoke to 180 different people and
Hmm.
trying to figure out customer discovery, trying to figure out product market fit in our journey. What we learned was when you get an email in as an underwriter, some of them are in caps, some of them come from broker friends who you prioritize, some of them are due tomorrow, so you put
It's
those on
true.
the top of the pile. And it doesn't necessarily align with the ones that you really want to win or the ones you really want to avoid. And so that sort of triaging is, I think, a very important function that doesn't deal with the middle or differentiating the middle of the pack at all, but does create huge operational efficiencies. And pilots were seeing 17% reduction in customer acquisition costs just by getting faster and better at finding the customers you want, which then turns over into increased profitability. The quicker you can turn around a quote, the more quotes you're going to win, the more you can automate, the more you can sort of beat your competitors. And
Yes.
so I think there's a lot of opportunity outside of the middle that we're actually tapping into.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? And I really appreciate you, really raising the flag of, hey, if we supply everything to everybody the same way, then there's no differentiation, and so everyone. Okay, so everyone has it wrong. Now everyone has it right, but they're all moving in the same direction. And so there's little ability to differentiate yourself. So you're almost in the exact same spot you were before. So that's a critical part of it. But I think now, like I think you're going beyond that. I think
Mhm.
let's talk about machine learning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you mentioned evolution. Let's talk about the evolution of this because it's overwhelming now, right? But
Yeah.
we're just like scratching the surface, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. But you're also not so far behind the pack as a, you know, insurtech, fintech, gov tech. A lot of these sorts of industries are figuring it out right now. So I do feel like it's, we're on track, right? It's a learning process where we come to understand both sides, and decide how we're going to responsibly deploy new technology. So I think we're definitely not behind. My thought on machine learning is, it's been a thing for 60 years, right? Like it's been out there. There's been other sort of um, Paul Revere's of sorts that have been waving the machine learning flag for a really long time. I think a lot of the dialogue right now on machine learning focuses on it's a fear-based dialogue around what is going to go wrong, what are regulators going to come after me for, what should I worry about in terms of how it will discriminate. And I think that those are really important conversations that are happening across a number of different industries right now. But I think there's also another conversation of like, all right, how are we going to take advantage of this? What's the opportunity? What's the upside for us? Yes, we should pay attention to the regulation. Yes, we should pay attention to privacy concerns. No, we shouldn't buy a black box. But all right, let's assume, just for fantasy's moment, that all of those issues do become resolved with time and with conversation and negotiation. What's the upside? And the
Hmm.
upside to me is just there's huge potential. And I get super excited and like giddy to just explain that, there's not only the potential to further, become more effective at pricing. I think a lot of, carriers have focused on that one problem, but there's so much more meat on the bone. There's marketing and distribution. How do you find customers? There's risk selection. How do you prioritize or triage customers into your pipeline? How do you increase automation reliably and profitably? How do you figure out how to deploy loss prevention strategies in real time in ways that are most effective and monitor their performance over time so that you can reliably predict and anticipate how your portfolio is going to perform next quarter, not wait for the cake to bake, watch it fail, and then reverse course too late. there is so much potential for machine learning, but I do think we're on that sort of precipice of transitioning the conversation away from the fear-based conversation, which we do need to still have, to an opportunity-based conversation. And I think that's some of the coolest conferences and events or panels that I hear are the people that are just inspiring me with ideas about how they're going to, seize the moment.
Well, let's expand on that conversation. You get in front of an insurance carrier.
Mm-hmm.
What are the main challenges in selling this?
Goodness, how much time do we have?
Let's go to lunch.
Okay. No, I think it's really important for insurance carriers, if any folks are watching that work for insurance carriers, to sort of tune in at this moment, because as a new business in the space, I expect to come up against certain barriers. I expect to be seen as too small or too underfinanced or too new to take a risk on. Those are sorts of risks that I'm comfortable having a conversation about, or based on the risk appetite of the carrier, waiting and saying, all right, you don't have to be first, but you can be second, you can be third, you'll catch on eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But the bigger challenges, I think the things that the insurance carriers actually could do to open the door just a little bit wider to the opportunity, the upside of machine learning, is first and foremost, your third-party data teams are fantastic professionals and incredibly qualified. They have focused on pricing for a really long time, bringing in more data, qualifying data, and figuring out how to optimize underwriting and pricing, adjusting the actuarial models on the fringes and figuring out, which industry classes to write. They're doing a great job in that space. But when a new company walks in and says, I have a machine learning approach, I have this new data source, I have this new fascinating thing you should, tilt yourself to the side, like look at the box from another angle on, it is always first and foremost okay, can we buy your data? How much is a record of data? They want to buy the raw data and not the insights. To our conversation before, there is no fact you're going to reveal in the data set. You gotta sort of expose yourself a little bit to the possibility that it's not about buying raw data anymore. It's about gathering a multitude of insights from experts across industries who can help inform your models and who are willing to open up the box, show you what's inside, maybe even give you the raw data. But at the end of the day, even if I gave my clients the raw data, even if I was like, yeah, let's do this, let me become the aggregator of city administrative data in its rawest form, you still wouldn't be able to use it. So I'm like, you know what? Can we get past already this we want your raw data conversation and get on to, okay, what value can I bring you beyond just giving you the data? You can have in my case, I love this conversation because I said, the data's already free. You can have it. It's already out there. Go get it. I dare you. And it's sort of like, I know that sounds really like confrontational. I certainly don't say that in a sales meeting, but that's how I feel. It's like, you know what, if I wanted to be a data aggregator, I would live a very boring life. I would be uninspired. I wouldn't be on this podcast. I'd be selling it for nickels and dimes on the corner, like here's a data record. Let's get past that. Let's move on to how can we bring a different expertise to the table and customize and refine products that do something more than just provide data records. I joke, but this is serious. My father was born in 1954. Great year. Love 1954. So was FICO. FICO was born in 1954. And there's very little competition to FICO. I think we should be asking ourselves why in 60 some odd years, we haven't thought about a better FICO. That's not raw data. That's bringing together a variety of information, however flawed it may ultimately be, but bringing together a variety of information to help insurance carriers quickly capture the financial security and forward-looking machine learning, right? This predictions. They use algorithms to predict who's going to repay their loans or who's going to file claims or who's a stable bet. There's not much else out there in my mind other than FICO that sort of does that function for other things, but there's certainly a lot of other opportunities to to do that. So I think we need to, as a collective industry, just become a little bit more comfortable with, we don't need all of the data sets ourselves in-house to extract value from them.
Yeah. I have so many parallels from what I do day to day.
Yeah.
You know, the FEMA flood maps have been around
Yes.
for a couple generations, and just on Twitter this weekend, I wouldn't call it an argument. I think there was some banter going back and forth, and I said, you know, the when someone says we need to improve the flood maps,
Mm-hmm.
I always rush forward because those flood maps are very expensive to make, and Long Beach, California is treated the same way as Long Beach, Florida is a flood zone in Long Beach, California is treated the same way as a flood zone in Long Beach, Florida is treated the same way as a flood zone in Long Beach, New York.
Hmm.
And there couldn't be more different. Yet we get like a V score or an AE score, and it's just like those are the same, and we're going to treat them the same. And I have the same pushback when someone tells me that we need to, you know, set pricing criteria or risk appetite criteria based off of those. I say, why? Long Beach, California does not get hurricanes. They are
Mm-hmm.
very different, and we can model that, and we can do, you know, some positive stuff there. So your
Mm-hmm.
message resonates with me. It's the same type of, um, I don't know if it's groupthink. Maybe it is groupthink in a way with what I do on the property side as to what
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing as well on your side. Um, so a question I have for you is, you said you push back. That's
Yeah.
actually like salesmanship 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need a way to push back. I'm curious as to whether you being placed on a podium at such a young age
Mm-hmm.
gave you, you know, do you think your sales ability, your ability to start a company and move product through, come up with ideas and push back, do you think part of that had to do with confidence you derived from growing up and being
Mm-hmm.
being placed in front of a group of people?
I mean, I'm definitely going to have to send this podcast to my mom. She's going to be a proud mom at the end of this. But, um, you know, I hate to divert an insurance technology podcast to feminism, but I'm going to do it for a hot
Do
second.
it. No, this is a all encompassing podcast. You talk about whatever you want.
Great. Great. But I think it's also an important conversation
Yeah.
for insurance, which is, you know, definitely transitioning into a stage that is much more diverse and much more inclusive. So I'll give you my perspective from the outside in, which is I grew up 10 minutes south of Hartford. So I grew up very much in the world of friends with parents who were in insurance,
Sure.
all around me.
Yep.
My parents were very blue collar though. My dad's a bicycle mechanic and my mom works for a grocery store as like the lady that puts the sale tags on. So
Mhm.
if you ever go to a grocery store and you see all the sale tags, like you have to appreciate Kathy because, oh my God, you realize how many sale tags there actually are when you pay attention to that. Anywho, side divergent there, but grew up in a very blue collar household that never told me that I was any different than guys. I was always like math forward. I once wrote an essay about how much I loved math. I loved math that much. But I never got the message that I was different. As a girl, I went to an all girls high school, so I never had that competition at that age. It really wasn't until I was in my 30s and started selling to insurance where I started realizing that there was still a patriarchy. And I think that was a disservice, both a good thing and a disservice that my parents did for me because I was totally unprepared to sell to people who looked down on me because I was a woman or because I looked a little young or because I didn't have a wedding ring on my finger. I think there's a lot of preconceived notions and ways that we sort of interpret and view the world around us. But when a young woman who's intellectually curious, intelligent, I'm an MIT graduate, so that helps, you know, walks into a room, it was a struggle to sell at first, right? It takes a few shepherds who can look past that, who do say like, and judge you on the merit of your product and judge you on the merit of what you're able to deliver when you work together. And those people are invaluable in the insurance industry. There's folks organizing sort of women in insurance conferences
Mhm.
that I think are doing great things. But it also comes from the executives at the top saying like, this person came in my door, I'm going to give them a shot. And that has helped tremendously as we started. It also takes on my side, because I was totally unprepared for that circumstance where I would be selling. Someone asked me once, like, who do you sell best to? And I'm like, people in suits. That like there's a genre, right? There's just one, almost like a universal one type of person that I sell to. And I had to get good at understanding what they needed to be comfortable. If you don't meet someone halfway, you're just screaming into the void, and that person might have a very distinct need and that you may be able to fill, but you're never going to get close enough to realize that there's a match. So I think, as much as it was a surprise, and it's a transition for me to sell into an industry that is predominantly white males in suits, it also was a learning experience. And I think should be a learning experience for every entrepreneur out there who doesn't look like or feel like or doesn't come from insurance. So I don't know. I went on a little bit of a
No, I love
10
that,
minutes
because
into
I want to
description,
keep
but
on that just for
yeah.
another question or two. So for those that are listening, because we've had podcasts on diversity and
Mm-hmm.
inclusion, and insurance nerds. Our CEO is Carly Burnham, so it's a topic we're well aware of and have been very promotional towards. So you seem very confident now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my guess is you could probably walk into a room with a bunch of suits and it probably wouldn't phase you. You probably would know what to do and how to handle it. So for someone that's listening, that's just now going through it, maybe a
Mm,
young woman professional, a young minority professional that's going into a room where everyone looks different than them.
I got
Um,
you.
yes. So what would you recommend? Is it just practice, or is there something else, something more to it?
Oh no, there's discrete things you can do. It's definitely practice and just, gaining your comfortability with the language, the lingo, the style, the, uh, you know, the how it works sort of behind the scenes. But two distinct tips that really helped me. One was from an aunt of mine who left home when she was like 17 years old and became a model in Europe and was like super, in magazines and got this early success. And I was just so inspired and like, wow, that's amazing. She left a small town to go be this big superstar. Probably wouldn't know her name, but still as a child it was very inspiring. And she shared with me a tip. She said, when you walk into a room, you walk in there like everybody in that room is there to see you. You're the star walking into that room. No matter if you're at absolute bottom of the totem pole, you need to turn heads. People need to notice that you just walked in. And if you walk in there with the attitude that I'm walking into this room, it happens regardless. Like it's the attitude you project that is welcomes those conversations. If you walk into a room with the knowledge that you were the absolute lowest person on the totem pole and you go in there kind of shirking and trying to dip in and trying not to be noticed, no one will approach you. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I walk into every room like I'm the keynote speaker, that everybody's been waiting for me to show up. And that gives me a boost of confidence as well, to feel like I'm entitled to be there and I should be there and I'm supposed to be there. But it also does attract a lot of folks to talk to you and, can overcome that sort of uncomfortability of like, how do I walk, how do I talk to people? How do I approach people I don't know? The other day I was at InsurTech Connect out in Las Vegas, and I had been trying to get this one gentleman from a carrier on the phone for months. And I walked into the room and the gentleman walked up to me and said, oh, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'll leave it off the air, but hi, my name is so-and-so. And I was like, I have been waiting to meet you.
You.
You're that guy. And we had a great conversation. So it works. That's one pro tip. The other pro tip I'm forgetting, but I'm sure it was a good one. But that one to
No,
start.
that is awesome. That is, well, I'll throw it out, like, fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that gets crapped on sometimes, but I believe that not in like the the phony way, but like, just if you walk into the room, be the star, and just
Yeah.
put it into your DNA, put it into your neurons, act it out. And like Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
Yeah. And I think that, yes, and the nuance of that is I don't like fake it till you make it, because I don't think I'm ever disingenuous to myself or faking it, right? Like, I actually believe that I've made it. And I walk into a room knowing that I've made it and projecting that.
Perfect.
You have to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So before we go into the personal questions
Oh,
to
sure.
end the podcast, one more on Open Data Nation.
Yeah.
What do you have in store?
Oh,
What's
I have some really cool stuff.
what's evolution is supposed to be this natural process, but I want you to peer into the future and
Mhm.
say, this is what's coming up for Open Data Nation. This is how we're going to change the world.
Yeah, I think this really cool product we just launched on the auto side. So we focus, and we didn't dive too deep into this, but we do focus on high volume lines of business. So small commercial business, auto. And the reason is because we think machine learning actually has the opportunity to affect the most amount of change and be the most effective models when you have a lot of data informing them. So high volume lines of business are our initial target. And on the auto side, I think it's a really open lane for us, not to no joke intended, open lane. But on auto, right, for however many years, we've been pricing auto based on the behaviors of drivers. And that's great and all. You know, your FICO score is definitely predictive of your likelihood to file an auto claim. I don't know, what the actual logic behind that is, but we've been looking at your personal behaviors. We added telematics devices to track how you drive, whether you speed, whether you hard brake, whether you're involved in a crash. And that's a great evolution. I think the next evolution is going to be a flip of the table. We're going to say, forget about personally identifiable information. It's all going to be about where you are. We have yet to measure the actual risk of the road. So if you're a driver that drives on a road that has a historical record of crashes at a time of day that's really dangerous, 3 o'clock when high school students are getting out of high school,
Interesting.
and it's snowing and
Mm,
there's potholes on that road and the lane is really wide and the median width is very wide, we're going to start to consolidate all that information, risk rate the roads themselves, and pair that with not only who you are, but where you're driving. And if I can forecast another 10 years down the road, 20 years, I don't care what the red herring is here on autonomous vehicles, it is going to become incredibly important when we sit down and realize that the way we've priced auto forever, we have not a single variable that we can use to inform how we're going to price autonomous vehicles if all of the data is based on behaviors and we take the person out of the car. So I think this new product that Open Data Nation is doing here is quite revolutionary. We're applying it early on with carriers that have telematics device data. So we're pairing, where they know their drivers might be with our scores of the roads that they're driving on, and further differentiating customers for discounts, for risk selection. So being able to extend beyond the pool that currently use telematics to encourage or to price risk for more beyond that. That's how we're applying it today. But absolutely in 10, 20 years down the road, this is going to be the most important thing that Open Data Nation or ODN does to the future of transportation and pricing of insurance for auto.
yeah. No, I think you set yourself up nicely because your technology doesn't become useless once autonomous vehicles come in. Same thing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I love telematics. We had a lot of friends with telematics devices, but I do think that they're like, if I can say something controversial, I think telematics are dead already in the water. Look, people aren't clamoring for more Big Brother devices to track where they go and how they drive. Carriers have to spend a lot of money on marketing and distribution. And the people who end up signing up for these programs end up being the top cream. So you see folks with that all look the same. They're the best drivers on the road. So if you had hoped that this was going to be an effort to collect a whole bunch of data that's going to help you inform pricing models, help you understand the risk rating on the road, what you're seeing is not a lot of differentiation that's going to help you if everybody looks similar. You got to have some bad drivers in the pool to be able to tell the difference between the bad drivers and the good drivers.
It's the opposite of adverse selection.
Yes, exactly. It's creaming, what we call creaming. But yeah, it's the opposite of adverse selection. So that's problematic. Our hope for telematics 5 years ago, and I was on that train saying, let's try this new thing that could really be quite interesting and quite transformational to auto. I think it's dead in the water now. We really have to think about a very different way that doesn't rely on, that responds to the feedback that we're getting from customers and the cost that it's taking and the value we're not getting from it, with a completely different approach. And that's what we're thinking about at ODN. We're saying, forget all the personally identifiable information that takes you forever to collect. It costs you a ton of money to collect. Forget about it. Get a sense of where people are. Think about all the variables that affect them and are exposed to them. Don't even ask them any questions about themselves. And we're finding that we're solving even more problems that we didn't expect to solve around racism and discrimination, because we don't know who you are. We don't know anything about you. We just know where you go on the road. And that seems to be, from the math anyways, the great equalizer. Everybody drives on the same shitty bridge to get to work in the morning. So we're finding we're solving problems that we didn't even know we could solve.
Strange that that highway with all the potholes is causing an above average number of accidents. Strange that would happen.
Yeah. And things, I always find it interesting. We find these weird little nuanced stories, but lane width is a really high predictor of traffic crashes. So wide roads, a lot of it's like people crossing takes them a while. It's hard to see. There's a whole, host of reasons, but you start to even reveal things you may not have even thought about before.
Yeah. I would like to see a data set or a breakout of California roads versus like New York roads, because California has these wide highways, but I have found that I feel like it's more dangerous because I feel like there's cars weaving in and out, and I feel like when you hear about like the big accidents, mostly on California roads, because you have high volume and high speeds and people just weaving in and out, versus in New York City, I feel like, even though I think they're horrible drivers, no offense, but they're more strategic. They already know there's only 4 lanes. There's only so far. So I went on a little tangent. I went on a little tangent there, but
no, I want to jump on that actually, because I think it's really important, and that's how we actually add a lot of value to the insurance carriers. It's like, it's cool to know. So what we help them do is actually directly compare California roads to New York roads. And why is it important? Well, we build a model in California, in specific cities in California. We build another model in New York. What we find in the New York model is that speed doesn't cause traffic crashes. So I can get you a speed data set all day for every major municipality in the United States, but how it matters in New York is very different than how it matters in LA. What you see is like a lot more fender bender accidents, a lot less serious injury, fatality in New York downtown than you do maybe in LA. So I think, it's ingenious what we're doing to say, let's build the models with local data, do the machine learning to predict crashes in New York, and only consider what's important in New York for New York's model. Make the outcome, which is a risk index or a score, comparable to the outcome in LA, even though LA's data may not be the exact same construct. It may not be that speed doesn't matter in New York, but it does matter in LA. So speed is in the LA model and not necessarily in the New York one. But the outcomes that say, is this road in California safer than this road in New York? You can make that direct correlation or that direct relationship.
Yeah. What happens if some of the stuff that's being kept track of, the municipality decides we're not going to keep track of the number of bikes that get stolen, at different, parking facilities?
Well, this is why I'm a great advocate for the insurance industry at and with the cities. We work with many of the cities directly to build the models. They actually benefit from them as well. They've been great customers of ours, but also great informants, right? They tell us what matters, and they're the ones collecting the data, so they better know it really, really well. But to your point, the data could go away. They could decide to stop investing in open data. And so the insurance industry and banking, financial, all of these industries need an advocate and government relations person who is saying, look, government is really important for you because our business is going to have a contingency, a dependency on the data that you produce. Now, cities are waiting for that moment. Cities started publishing open data because they thought that it was going to create $1 billion open data business. It was going to spur a whole bunch of economic activity and decision making, and businesses were going to use this data. We're the bridge. ODN is the bridge between cities and the commercial sector to try to transition that, to make that become a reality, paint that piece of artwork. But cities are waiting for the private sector to use it. And the minute the private sector uses it, they have a justification to keep it open. They have a commercial interest that is, saying we need this specific data set in this specific format to continue to exist forever. We want to work together because when insurance does use your data, we're able to price risk differently that changes behaviors of drivers on the road. We're able to give carriers like UPS, Uber, Lyft, Ryder information that prevents losses and prevents people from getting in crashes and saves lives. Cities want those partnerships. They're eager for them, but it takes the use cases that we're defining both with the cities and with the carriers to, I think, solidify the long-term future of some of these open data assets. The easier answer to that, the less sophisticated answer, is it's FOIA-able, which means the Freedom of Information Act, thank you, George W. Bush, I believe, did open up the ability for me to always, whether you publish it or not, ask for information. Knowing what I need to ask for has been a fantastic benefit to ODN because we're not asking for the world of data. We're not asking for 80 data sets. We're asking for 10, 12 data sets from each city that they're able to provide. So because we've done the legwork to know what variables matter, we can then be very strategic about what we ask for when we do need to FOIA for some records.
Yeah. Could there ever be a situation where because commercial interests are, such as yourself, building models and people are taking advantage of the data for profit, that the municipalities could come back and say, hey, you guys are making money off of this. We're going to start to charge you or tax you or do something to try to collect back the benefit that you guys are deriving.
Yeah, and maybe they should. I'll be controversial on that, but cities struggle to balance the budget every year and provide basic civil services to people, and they're sitting on a gazillion-dollar asset that they yet to figure out how to monetize. If even charge me a penny, charge me something. It doesn't make sense to give it away for free. But the argument is that my taxpayer dollars paid to create that data, paid to store that data, and so it should be a free and open resource, much like a public library that provides books, learning, and knowledge in an era of the digital economy and machine learning and the evolution of data science. It is an important asset that I do think cities have largely felt is a public service and haven't felt a strong will to monetize. But coming from the private sector, you're like, why wouldn't they? This seems like such an amazing opportunity. Completely. But it's just a different mentality in the public sector.
Completely. Yeah. I saw, I'll put the link to the site in the database, the data dictionary up on the show notes. By the way, I love Airtable. I'll throw that in there. Awesome way to store it.
Yeah, go ahead. I would encourage people to check out the data sets, be in touch if they're interested in knowing more about specific data sets or where they can go look in their local community. Oftentimes the easiest way to find data that might be relevant to where you live is just Googling open data and the name of your place.
Okay. Real quick, some personal questions to learn more about you. Where's your next vacation planned?
Next vacation. Well, as a startup entrepreneur, vacations come few and far between. They're often work vacations, which is okay. I get to explore because I work in cities. I've been all around the world and back a few times. My next trip, which I'm super excited about, I was just invited up by the chief information officer of Anchorage, Alaska, to
Hmm.
go to the Iditarod. And
Oh,
I am stoked. So Anchorage, Alaska, surprising, it may be surprising to many people, has some of the best open data in the United States. It is, I am like always lauding the efforts that they've made to publish information that is really high quality, goes back like 10 years on average, millions of records of really, really great data up in Anchorage if you're looking for a spot to start. And so we're going to help them out on a project actually around deploying health inspectors to small businesses to make sure that employees are safe on the job. And we're going to go up during the Iditarod so that I get to maybe mush on the back of dogs,
nice.
which would be a really fun
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would want to do that. That's
I'm
fantastic.
stoked. I've never been to Alaska, and it also just seems like a good opportunity.
Yeah. Music question. If you got stuck on a desert island, what one album would you want to have?
Oh,
Just one.
just one. I feel
Hmm.
like this dates me too, though.
It's an album. It's gonna date everybody because nobody buys albums anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, what do I listen to on Spotify? And I'm like, I don't think I've listened to a full album in a really long time. I grew up in a rock and roll household and I'm Canadian. So I'm going to go with maybe a Rush album.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the early stuff like Limelight's like my favorite song. So I would
Awesome.
maybe say that just to keep it up tempo and like feeling positive
So
about being on an island all by
you
myself.
have listened to some of my prior podcasts, right? You probably have not listened to some of the first podcasts.
I
So the
don't think I
first
did
six
that.
months before we transitioned to free
Okay.
music, before we realized we had to do that. The lead in was "Spirit of Radio" by Rush.
Oh, nice,
So which
nice.
is just to me is just like this is like I want to put a helmet on and go through a brick wall every time I hear that song. I love Rush.
Yes. And I just grew up, I think it would like bring back fond memories. My dad used to use the dashboard of our pickup truck as like the complete drum set of Neil Peart. So he
Of
would like go
course,
around the dashboard of the
yes,
car drumming.
of
Exactly.
course, absolutely. You know,
So it
my
brings up
wife's always asking me, how come you drum? Why do you drum so loud? You don't have to drum so loud. Like he's loud, I'm loud. It's like how do you get into it? You have to drum loud. So I love
yes,
that. Okay.
exactly. That's my childhood.
What tools or techniques do you use to help you stay productive and or organized? Any cool tools or techniques that you feel like are
Yes.
helpful?
Yeah. So I live with a really inspiring person. That helps, right? Like having a partner, having people around you, even coworkers or co-founders, I think keeps me like, oh man, he's really hustling or she's really hustling. Like, I need to get on my game. That keeps me feeling like I'm also living in New York City is probably part of that.
Yeah.
But I think the really cool tool or technique that I use is actually I learned recently is to do things 90% of the way so that they feel undone and you feel an urgency to complete them. So if you are working on, you're getting through your email inbox, leave like for the most recent emails unread because you'll go to lunch and you'll feel like you need to get back because there's emails in your inbox that you've been deficient on reading. Now is an hour going to make that big of a difference? Maybe not. So it helps me feel that sort of urgency that I'm never done with work. There's always more to do. There's always more I could be doing.
Cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Final question. What books have been influential in your business and or personal lives?
Hmm. I'm looking behind me because we got our bookshelf behind me. There's one book. It's called The Economy. Sorry, it's called The Economy of Cities by Jane Jacobs. It's a city planner book, but I think it's really quite interesting because she approaches it from sociocultural exploration of poverty in cities, but at the same time is able to talk about how cities grow, how capitalism causes cities to grow, and then how the sort of adverse effects of crime and disease and the concentration of so many people then ultimately causes people to disperse or leave. And so we talk about like the movement of people in space a lot. We use a lot of geospatial statistics. And I think that that's like the, Bible, or like the first core reading in 101 to understand sort of what inspires us and what keeps us moving is understanding how the economy of cities works, how cities make money, how people living in cities come to be there, why they're there, why they continue to be there, and some of the adverse consequences that come from people being so concentrated in one space. So I would say the Economy of Cities by Jane Jacobs is a keeper.
Awesome. I'll put that on the show notes. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I appreciate you spending an hour. An hour went by with me. I feel like we could have gone in a lot more. And without giving it away, maybe people who listen to Profiles and Risk, they might be hearing your voice a little bit more, more to come on that. But thank you so much for spending an hour with me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and to all of your audience and followers, look forward to staying in touch.
Okay. My guest this week has been Carey. Do you generally say Anne in your name?
I do. Carey Anne.
Anne
Mm-hmm.
Nadeau.
Mm-hmm.
So you are
That's
Canadian. Ugh,
I'm
okay.
Canadian.
Go Rush. Anyways,
Bye.
for everyone that's listening, thank you very much. Carey Anne, thank you so much again.
Thanks again. Bye, all.
Bye, everyone. Okay.